This is all wrong. I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you!
Boring. Boring. Boring.
You got it work. Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position to dictate that. Remember what you're doing. You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel.
I call again for immediate ceasefire in Gaza, the return of the sausages, the hostages.
Turn of the sausages, never tire of hearing that. Welcome to Lembit Öpik Live here on Unprecedented TV, where we find the facts, kill the spin, and tell it like it is as best we can. We share facts as best we can, establish them and our opinions, but now the twain shall meet. When it's my view, you'll know it's my view, and I expect you to make the effort to draw your own conclusions on what you see. We have a fantastic guest today, Ben Habib, leader of Advance UK, and a former representative of Reform UK. We'll talk about that a bit as well. But the subject today is the state of British politics and why Advance is advancing. I'm told they have a very large number of members. We'll find out from Ben exactly how many. And it seems that they have a narrative, a story, something to say. It could be argued that the big problem the Labour Party has is they have no narrative. I know what that feels like. That's what happened to the Lib Dems when Nick Clegg took over. In my view, he utterly wrecked the party because he had no political compass. So the party, for a while, drifted into oblivion. Although they did pretty well in the general election, I would argue that the Lib Dems are still drifting. Now, that is a huge problem in politics. Many people think that the problem we've got with the Uni Party, that's the Conservatives, Labour, and the Lib Dems, is none of them really have a very clear agenda. Or to be more precise, they have the same one. They like the idea of some kind of weird economics, which wrecks itself by going crazy about the environment and the, in my view, non-existent climate crisis. They all seem to be obsessed with woke. And perhaps worst of all, they don't seem to be too happy with anybody else queering the political pitch by coming on board. That's why they almost universally and relentlessly criticize anybody who makes a threat to the old three-party establishment. So what is to be done? Well, Advanced UK thinks an alternative has to be put forward, and it isn't reform. Others say, well, that's the splitting the opposition vote, and everyone should get together and push out the old parties and bring in the new. That creates some stress, not least because there are clear internal pressures and strains between the characters involved. Before I bring Ben in, let me say this. It's quite obvious that somebody who was a mainstream politician for 13 years in the Lib Dems, it's quite obvious to me that the system's broken, that the Labour Party, the Lib Dems and the Tories are totally incapable of changing the doom-ridden course which will drive the United Kingdom onto the rocks. None of them seem to have the quality, the caliber of politician. You only have to look at the leaders. Ed Davey, who insists on playing the clown. People think he did well because he got a lot of seats, but he'd have got a whole lot more, in my view, if he'd played it seriously. We've got Kemi Badenoch, who is a nice enough person, but doesn't seem to have the mojo, despite having more than 25 times larger numbers of MPs than the Reform UK. They don't make anything like the same impact. And then we got Keir Starmer, who seems to be able to grab embarrassment and defeat from the jaws of every victory. Most recently, if you're watching this live, in the debacle in Egypt, when he managed to utterly humiliate himself when Donald Trump shook his hand, turned his back and dismissed him. So what could happen? Is Reform UK all set to become the next government? The bookies say yes, but not everybody agrees. Is there an alternative? Well, that's where Advance UK, I think, would like to place themselves. And delighted to welcome Ben Habib, the leader of Advance UK, here to Unprecedented TV. Ben, great to see you again. You're looking very chipper. You always do.
That's very kind of you. You're looking wonderful as well, Lembit. Thank you
It's
for having me on.
It's the lighting, the lighting.
Yeah.
I can't take credit for having a particularly healthy lifestyle, but I do go swimming 3 times a week, whenever I can. Now, you seem to be in a fairly healthy position as a party. Perhaps we should start at the beginning. What is Advance UK?
So Advance UK is a party that believes in 4 things, essentially. The nation state of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, including its constitutionally Christian roots, freedom, freedom of speech, freedom from indoctrination, and freedom to do as we wish as a people without too much government interference. Democracy, so making our elected officials accountable to us rather than they're being defeated repeatedly by international law and having power taken out of their hands by the bureaucrats that run the various quangos and regulatory bodies that are increasingly governing the country. And then fourthly, equality under the law. In other words, Lady Justice should be blind, irrespective of who you are. If you commit the crime, you do the time. And now you might think, Lembit, that what I've just outlined, nation state, freedom, democracy, and equality under the law, 4 basic principles by which every single political party presumably governs or seeks to govern.
I was going to say exactly that. Everything you said should happen in every party, in my view.
Yeah, but it doesn't. There isn't a single political party you can point to which actually abides by and holds those 4 legs of our mission statement sacred as we do. And we've started by setting out the mission statement so that we have a political philosophy on which to then form all our policy to make sure that our policy is consistent with our philosophy and hangs together in a coherent, holistic way. And the reason I say the other political parties don't hold these values dear is because, I mean, take any one of those legs and I can evidence it. But let's just take nation state, for example. The Labour Party would have us back in the European Union. That's not standing up for the nation state of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. The Tories put a border down the Irish Sea and left Northern Ireland behind. That's not standing up for the nation state of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And reform, Farage's reform, is on the record saying he sees a united Ireland as inevitable. So, I mean, all 3 of the most popular parties in the United Kingdom at the moment fall at the first hurdle. And then if you examine some of the other stuff, they failed there too. I mean, freedom of speech. We've had successive Labour and Conservative governments that have put into place regulations and laws that prohibit freedom of speech, which actually police what it is that we say, even if it's not an incitement to violence or racial hatred in the way that you and I grew up. I mean, it was a pretty high bar, Lembit, when you and I were growing up on breaking the law based on what you said. And I remember as a young man saying, well, we've got freedom in this country. I can say whatever I want. And you can't now. I was horrified, by the way. I'll just digress a second. I was horrified the other day. I looked up the definition of far right. The government has taken it upon itself to put out a definition of far right. And it includes it includes people who believe in cultural nationalism. In other words, it includes people who believe in a settled culture for the United Kingdom. And the definition of a nation state, the definition of a society is having a settled culture. So we've got elected representatives, such as they are, do not represent the values for which we stand. They stand against the nation state. I regard Starmer as anti-British. His desire to take us firmly back into the European Union and hand power over to foreign power can only be regarded as anti-British. The way he's clamping down on freedom of speech is, antithetical to our democratic roots. But of course, if you practice extreme ideologies like he does, you mentioned net zero in your introduction. If you practice ideologies that are so obviously damaging to the British people, mass migration, not enforcing your borders, etc., the only way to control the people is to shut them up, right? So freedom of speech becomes challenging. And I'm afraid reform and the Tories are part of the same problem. The Tories have passed many regulations that control freedom of speech, and reform polices its own membership and throws you out if you have an independent view. It's all very prickly, And then in terms of democracy, well, we've allowed through successive governments to defeat our ability to govern ourselves through entering into international treaties, memberships of supranational institutions. That's not democracy. So those that govern us clearly don't believe in democracy. And then equality under the law, I mean, that's the easiest one to pick apart, because we get told if you're from an ethnic minority, you should actually get a lesser prison sentence. If you're from a disadvantaged background, you should get a more sympathetic hearing. I mean, this is all nonsense. That's the politicizing of our criminal justice system.
I want to raise one of those points. Something that's been in the news quite recently, for quite a long time, is the prescription of Palestine Action, I think they're called.
Yeah.
And recently I heard that the government failed to stop an appeal. It's incredible the government wanted to stop the appeal. Not that they wanted to win it, they wanted to stop the appeal. Because a lot of people, hundreds, probably over 1,000 people have been arrested, and lots of them are pensioners and people who wouldn't normally get arrested. Now, I'm not that keen on Palestine Action. I don't like organizations that cause damage. I think it's stupid. I think it's criminal, basically. But to prescribe an organization and then to have these embarrassing pictures of, well, there's one, for example, of an old lady being arrested. I'm sure she represented no threat to society. Why? Because she wrote a placard with a pen saying something like, I support Palestine Action. I'm not sure, leaving aside the whole Israel-Palestine thing, because that's a completely separate discussion, the principle of shutting people like that lady up and arresting her for holding a sign, it just seems to me insane.
Yeah, so I think at the time that she was arrested, Palestine Action, whatever it's called, I can't remember the third letter. Is it Palestine Action Group? Anyway, they are still a prescribed organization, even though the appeal is now going through. So I think there is an argument to be made that if you're protesting in favor of a prescribed group, that you are able to be arrested. What's remarkable for me is some of the language used at those Palestinian marches and the advocacy for Hamas that didn't result in arrests, actually, because Hamas is horrific. I mean, it's a really horrific organization. I've just been speaking to a friend of mine who's in Israel at the moment, and he watched some of the footage of what happened on the 7th of October, 2023. And he was absolutely shaken by it. So, and yet we had people marching through our streets advocating for Hamas. But there is a fine balance between freedom of speech and making sure that civil society isn't assaulted as a result of that.
The thing is, I don't want to go too far down this path, because I've never, actually in my whole life, I've never convinced anyone on either the Zionist, I don't tend to use the word Israeli because lots of Muslims live in Israel, but the Zionist argument or the Palestinian argument, I've never convinced anyone to change side. My issue here, and so therefore I don't often even really cover it on the show, because we can share the facts, but I doubt whether any of our viewers will necessarily come across, because you and I have an argument and one of us wins, even if we were to disagree. But my issue here is that the organization was prescribed. It cheapens the law when you prescribe an organization. And so you're right, the police are just doing what they legally are entitled to do. But if some idiots do millions of pounds worth of damage to a military aircraft, they should be prosecuted for doing millions of pounds of damage to military aircraft. I wouldn't prescribe the entire organization, not least because people dumb enough to do that are already breaking the law. So I'm not sure what you achieve. But
what I find remarkable is that they could even break into an RAF base. Why weren't they apprehended? It's extraordinary that our security is so lax that you could get up close to a military jet. It's just extraordinary in my head.
Our security is so lax, Ben. I'm glad you're sitting down. It's so lax that 1,000 people can come across the channel in boats and walk into the country and no one stops them, even though apparently Keir Starmer thinks that we can defend 1,400 miles of Ukrainian border. We can't even defend 20 miles of channel. So
I know. Well, that's the irony of it all. You know, he bangs the drum for the sovereignty of Ukraine, for the protection of its borders, the necessity to spend billions of British taxpayers' money on it, get ourselves embroiled potentially in a war with Russia. He's prepared to do all of that, but he won't stop illegal migrants crossing the channel. It's just unbelievable.
Why do you think he doesn't? Why do you think it's not exactly a digression, because it's a really pretty big story. And actually, on another show, we interviewed a chap from from West Drayton. We'll be putting that on. Claire Dyer has done a lot of work on this, on dire consequences. But Marilyn Hawes brought to my attention this fellow. And we put it out this morning. And what happened was they've got 3,000 migrants there. And they hang around outside the primary school. They stand on bins so that they can see the children. They tear down the awnings which are meant to stop them being able to do that. And then they threaten local parents who are complaining. That's the state of the country. And Starmer's let all that happen. But he's willing to arrest a 70-year-old woman for having a handwritten sign saying, I don't know what she said. I
mean, what you've just said is horrific. Tearing down signs so that they can actually see children in the primary school.
Yes, that's what they do. They hang around there, and they've
absolutely disgusting.
They molested mothers. They molested 13-year-old child. Specific case. We've got footage on that. We'll probably play that program quite a lot. It's disturbing, and this guy James Timms is really taking it. He's an ordinary guy, not political, but he's taking it upon himself because his children are in danger. His friends' children are in danger, and so we live in a society where you can get arrested in Trafalgar Square for sitting there supporting what I think is a pretty idiotic organization, actually. I just like Just Stop Oil. I don't like people who cause damage to make a point. Very rare when that's acceptable. And they can't even look after the people of West Drayton. And they can't look after the people in all these other areas where the cultures are being banned, being destroyed. You mentioned about maintaining British heritage. Presumably what we're saying could be regarded as illegal because you want to support British culture.
Yeah, we would be regarded under the government definition that was put out as being far right, simply because we wish to protect our culture, which is an absolute absurdity. But you're so right. In the pursuit of what they say in their minds is being civilized, and in their minds it means to be civilized, you've got to allow people to enter the country illegally if they seek to enter it illegally. They're allowing civilized society to be assaulted, and this is, I think, one of the most dangerous aspects of the way that we're governed, because the British people can see that their interests are not being protected, that they are not being protected. And the British people are increasingly becoming more vocal and upset about it. And even though they're getting more upset, the government is not changing the way that it approaches the problem. And Starmer, for example, I mean, you'll remember this after the Southport protest, came out and said everyone who's protesting was far right. But actually, there would have been a hell of a lot of people there who were white, working class Labour voters. Yeah. They just want the government to do the right thing. And unless and until the government does the right thing, there's a real risk, I think, that the people of this country will lose patience with the political system, the institutions in which they used to have faith, and take matters into their own hands. Well, that will be in no one's interest.
Beginning to happen. As an aside, I still want to believe that this is a joke. There's Downing Street with the Ukrainian flag on it, and there's no joke that they were flying the Ukrainian flag. It's so topsy-turvy. In other words, the government is saying, if you want to support Britishness, and my parents who came here from Estonia, they always said, embrace the culture that embraced us. If you want to support Britishness, then you're far right. But if you adorn the home of the Prime Minister with flags literally waving on the top, maybe this is fake. I fear it may be true. That's great. That supports Zelensky, who runs one of the most corrupt regimes on the continent of Europe. Wherever you stand in terms of the war, a country which is essentially the powerhouse for illegal arms trades all over the world. That's all fine. But woe betide
you make a very good point. You make a really good point. Before the war broke out, Ukraine's standing in law and order was below Nigeria's. Yeah. And as we all know, when you have war and you have massive armaments being shipped around and sent to a particular country for the fight, there's a huge amount of corruption that goes on at the edges of that, because you can make a fortune out of the arms trade. War is a fantastic opportunity for many to make money, and we'd be naive and stupid not to appreciate that.
Guess what? We are naive, we are stupid, because we spend billions and billions helping Ukraine lose land every day. Warren Thornton, who's one of our regular contributors, is quite well connected, and he reckons that Ukraine's losing about 6,000-7,000 a day, orders of magnitude more than Russia. But we don't get to hear it. We don't even get to have that debate on the mainstream. We get told, even just before we went on air today, we've been told, oh yeah, Ukraine's really doing badly, but Russia's losing even more. And they're not talking about the United Kingdom. They're not talking about the national interest. They come up with this crazy idea, well, if Ukraine falls, then Britain will be next. Why would Putin want to take on Britain? His growth rate would be brought down. If we became part of the United of Russia, he would have an economic problem. Just imagine Rachel Reeves running Russian economy. Oh, he's so awful. Last year, I think it was, during the sanctions and everything else, Russia's growth rate was 4%. 4%. We'd give anything for that. Meanwhile, we got Rachel coming back from accounts from complaints coming back for more taxes. I think all of this is quite relevant because Advance UK has a chance to set out its stall now. I will try and compare and contrast with Reform in a minute. What would Advance UK say? Just out of interest, what would Advance UK say about the Ukraine war? I have to say I'm not keen on the war. I think we should sue for peace. I think that the whole thing was misguided. I think NATO provoked it because in 1990 we made promises we broke. You may have a different view, but just out of interest, how would you handle where we are now? How would you get us out of that?
So I think of all the things that have gone wrong in the last 20, 30 years with British governance, we have become far too engaged and interested in foreign interventions and have turned our back again on the United Kingdom in the pursuit of these foreign interventions. Of course, there are many examples that are much worse than Ukraine, like Iraq, like the Arab Spring in 2011, Iraq in 2003, the Arab Spring in 2011, and of course the 22-year war in Afghanistan that yielded absolutely nothing but cost us billions and billions of pounds of expenditure, and I think about 500 British lives, and nothing to show for it. And what Advance UK wishes to do is yank the debate back home. I'm really much more interested in domestic policy, what we can do domestically for the betterment of our country, which of course does include spending on military defense so that we are capable and deter anyone who wishes to have a pop at the United Kingdom. But under an Advance UK government, we would be much less interventionist internationally. We certainly wouldn't be an isolated country, but we would only get involved internationally where there is a clear reason domestically for us to be doing it. In the national interest, if there's a reason for us to do it, we would do it. But really, we would wish to exit most of the pointless interventions and sort of foreign expeditions, adventures that our politicians have hitherto, embarked on.
Would you actually support this, in my view, ridiculous coalition of the willing, which doesn't do anything? That was Starmer's desperate rearguard attempt to try to find relevance. Or would you say we've just got to sit down and we've got to redraw the boundary now, because the longer the war goes on, the more square kilometers Putin will get. And even if you're on Ukraine's side, it doesn't make sense.
No, I mean, I think it's very dangerous, by the way, just in case Russia overwhelms Ukraine, you will then have a very, very emboldened, bold and pissed off Russia.
Yeah.
And they'll be right on our border. I've said right from the beginning of this conflict, actually, that during any moment of advantage for Ukraine, they actually ought to sue for peace, because at least then they can negotiate from a strong position. If Russia should somehow roll its way through Ukraine and push back all the attempts by Zelensky to defend the country, I think we'll find ourselves in a much deeper pickle. So I broadly support President Trump, of course. Why wouldn't I? I think any sane-minded individual would want to bring peace as fast as possible. At the same time, of course, we should be building up our own armed forces. What we've done is turn our back on our ability to defend ourselves, and then and sort of pursue this war against Russia. It's a proxy war for us through Ukraine. I mean, I'll never forget, but you might remember this. It was about 9 months ago, I think, that Starmer cut back military spending by 500 million one day, where he cut back the helicopter fleet on for part of our Navy, and he put on ice a frigate and a couple of other cancellations he made. On the same day, he gave Ukraine the authority to fire Stormfire missiles, which are British missiles, deep into Russian territory. So he was poking the bear at the same time as disarming domestically. If you are going to be interventionist abroad, And yeah, actually, frankly, whether or not you're going to be interventionist abroad, but particularly if you are, you need to have a bloody strong
Yeah,
military.
yeah.
And we don't. We've denuded our military like so many other things.
Yeah.
And I read the other day, I don't know if you saw this, absolutely on point, that we're now inviting Indian Air Force instructors to instruct our pilots because we've got a deficit of instructors in the RAF. Can you imagine the Indian Air Force instructing British pilots, instructing the RAF? There was not a moment in history before this that could even have been conceived. We had one of the best air forces in the world, and now we're taking lessons from India. I just,
It's unbelievable.
it makes you tear whatever little hair I've got out.
No, I hadn't noticed it till you said, actually. I like to tell people I dye mine, but it's not true. But we'll continue with in just a minute. I just want to advertise one of our other shows, and it's quite relevant to what we're discussing. Ben is highlighting some of the scandals, really, in politics, and we'll talk a bit more about what an advanced UK government would do in just a moment. But Claire Dyer, one of our great presenters, runs Dire Consequences, and she covers some of the things we're discussing now. She tends to take a local issue of national interest. Have a watch of this. It's a tremendous series, usually on Tuesday mornings, UK time at 8 a.m. and on Thursdays at 5 p.m. But we have extra showings as well by demand. If you want to see one of those other shows, then you let us know. But for now, we're back with Ben Habib, leader of Advance UK. So we've talked about international policy. I'm tempted to indulge myself. I won't do this and go into more detail about what we could do internationally, but we've got an idea. I think that the main takeaway from what you were saying before the break was that it's absolutely insane to poke Russia and then cut our military spending. He's now saying he's going to increase it again, but he hasn't got any money because they've declared war on carbon dioxide, the gas of life. I want to move on to that one. Where would Advance UK?
Well, I mean, let's just talk about military. I think it's a really good example of net zero going wrong. We've shut down our own independent steelmaking capability.
Yeah,
We've deindustrialized the United Kingdom on the altar of net zero, exporting strategically important manufacturing processes to third countries, including China, which is effectively now, we know, spying on us and interfering in our government at the highest possible level. And yet we're relying on them for, critical supply of steel. We're buying, I mean, it's just madness. And we are buying electric cars from them hand over fist. BYD, I think, is the name of the Chinese electric car, and it is the biggest selling electric car in the United Kingdom. Now, who knows what kind of chips and so on they've got installed in these cars, whether or not they could bring these cars to a halt overnight. I know people might look at this and say, well, he's being a bit conspiracy theory there, but why? That's not conspiracy theory. The Chinese have been clearly hostile to the United Kingdom. That's, that's obvious. And yeah, so, we go on and on and on. And so we've deindustrialized, we've empowered a third country that's potentially hostile to us. We're incapable of mounting an independent defense. But it's even worse than that, actually, Lembit, because we are now, Starmer is busy signing us into the European Defence Union. This is happening completely under the radar. He talks about the strategic necessity to cooperate with his partners in Europe. What he's doing is handing over control of British military to Brussels. That's where this is going. It's wretched.
Before you go too far from it, I have to say I'm very publicly known as quite Sinophile, quite keen on China. I'd have actually moved there in '97 in my old job if I hadn't become an MP. And the reason was because I can see it's the future. And there we go. I think they wanted to show you the Ed Miliband picture there. This man could have been the Prime Minister in an alternate reality. That's the thing. Yeah, it's. I think
he
it's
may yet be prime minister.
It could be. Yeah, just imagine. It would be worth it. It would be worth it for laughs, but for no other reason than that. And I have to say that the concern I've got with the whole situation when it comes to the environment is that we completely contradict ourselves. Whether or not you're keen on China, there's no doubt China produces far more CO2 per thing that they make than we do. But we just don't seem to care about that. As long as it's done in China, then it's fine. But if it's done over here, then it's not fine. If it's done over
box
here,
ticking,
then
isn't it? It's box ticking to hit net zero.
Yeah, absolutely ridiculous. And I wanted to say, just in terms of China, I'm quite keen. I'm not worried about them spying on us because our Secret Service leaks like a sieve always has done. Russia and America and Britain have been spying on each other. We know that America was spying on Germany, not like in World War II, like some years ago, recently.
I know.
They're kind of spying
Recently,
on Angela Merkel.
I remember.
Yeah, so I don't care. It's like when people, I've had my phone hacked repeatedly. I could actually hear somebody once listening in, which I believe was the news of the world. I could hear them. And it just annoyed me more than anything else. And then when I was helping Estonia get its freedom, I was having bugs on my landline. It was before mobile phones. I knew people were listening because I could hear Radio 2 on my landline. And if I changed the frequency on my good old Wi-Fi, it would change on my, sorry, not Wi-Fi, on my hi-fi. That's a sign of the times. My hi-fi would change on the phone. So I'm not worried about China so much, and not least because of what you said. If we stopped getting all of the stuff that we buy from China, we would end up dropping the sticks together because we can't make anything anymore.
We're in a difficult place. And I think President Vance said it very, very well. He said, countries need to make stuff. We don't make anything anymore.
Right. We don't. Well, we make whoopee when it comes to woke ideology, which I want to come to next. So on the environment, then, you'd abandon net zero? I think you're smart enough a person.
Absolutely, net zero is crazy.
I complained to the BBC very recently because I listened to something on the Today program and Radio 4. I listened mainstream, have to, and within a 5 or 7 minute interview about winemaking in Britain, the conversation went unchallenged when they blamed climate change for warming, cooling, drought, and heavy rain. So I've written to them saying, could you send us the evidence to show how all those 4 contradictory phenomena are caused by the same thing? I'm waiting for a response. I shall share it when I get it. But we could actually fill the self-created black hole of Rachel Reeves just by junking net zero, couldn't we?
100%. I mean, net zero is doing so much damage, and it's not just turning our on cost-effective access to fossil fuels. Yeah. It's also all the other obligations that go with net zero, like giving up your perfectly good fossil fuel-powered internal combustion engine car and buying an electric one at vast cost. Yeah. Giving up your perfectly good gas boiler at home and installing a heat exchanger at vast cost. Yeah. Yeah. And I think they're quite noisy as well. And then there's another thing that is so awful about net zero. It's prohibiting the use of perfectly good property in the United Kingdom because it doesn't comply with net zero. So we're seeing, we're incessantly going on about how we haven't got enough housing, how town centres are derelict, they can't be brought back into use. A very significant part of that is at the door of net zero because the buildings in town centres tend to be historic, older buildings, and to bring them back into use is prohibitively expensive because of the net zero obligations on insulation, heating, etc., etc. And so we're then going to build on perfectly lovely green fields, which have no need to be built on because we have adequate buildings, in town centres and elsewhere that should be repurposed, but we won't repurpose them. And then just to make things even worse, Lembit, these new buildings that we're creating, which are completely net zero compliant, their biggest blight is that they suffer from mold because there's no internal draft. And a draft is actually quite good for human health, having some air going through your property. We've gone mad. We've gone mad on net zero.
We spotted some holes, literally holes in the wall you can see outside in the structure of the studio. It's a fairly old building. but we're not going to swap them because we were advised that's why you have absolutely no mold or damp problem in your building. They said the cost you're paying is probably 10% more in your heating, but the benefit is you'll never need to worry about damp rot. And it's an interesting thing. I used to work in a huge corporation, and none of the windows opened. It was designed like that, I think, in the 1960s. And so it's all internal air conditioning. Do you know the main problem with that?
On me.
It was that everyone got a cold at the same time.
Yeah, once you've got a bug in it, you can't get rid of the bug. Yeah,
literally, it would recirculate through the whole thing, and they put filters in and so on, but didn't stop it. I want to talk about woke a bit. With climate change, I think it's gone out of fashion a bit now, but it's still a problem because foolish people like Ed Miliband and Starmer, and actually Ed Davey from the Lib Dems, and obviously the Greens, that odd fellow Zach Polanski, they're all obsessed with it, and they still wag the dog of politics. But same is true of woke ideology. Now the courts,
they go hand in hand, don't they?
They seem to, and it's the same people. The Zach Polanski must be laughing his head off. This tiny little party has managed to pretty much wreck the UK economy. Well, they fly around the world telling us not to fly. But with woke ideology, it's the same thing. We've got this court ruling, Ben, which says, and this isn't radical thinking, that if you were born a man, you are a man. But apparently still the government wants to reject this. They still rail against it. What's happened?
Well,
the logic.
It's the suspension of common sense.
Yeah.
And it's testament to a complete collapse in our ability to think straight. That's what it is. And if you can't think straight, frankly, you will end your own civilization. That's where we're at. We're at a position, I think, Lembit, without wishing to sound, dramatic, where our own civilization will end unless we get a grip of our inability to think.
A couple of other quick policy areas I want to cover, and then I want to finish with the dynamic between advance and reform. I would say that the two most credible replacements for the old parties are advance and reform. But we've got digital ID cards being touted by Keir Starmer. There, look how pleased he is. I'm sure that's pretty much Photoshop, but he wants us to have digital ID cards. Perhaps he wants us all to be called Jack Kelly as well. I'm not sure, but to me, governments cannot manage these kinds of projects intelligently. They made a complete £12.5 billion fiasco trying to digitalize all of our health data in the NHS. But worse than that, Ben, my worry is you give these clowns all of that data, it's going to be leaked. It's going to be abused.
Absolutely.
We're going to be victims.
Right. No doubt.
So, how have we got to a stage where that self-satisfied prime minister and his predecessor Tony Blair, who's back in the frame again, ironically trying to broker a peace, and he knows more about war than peace. How is it that we're in a situation where digital ID is all but being forced upon us? Although I don't think they'll be able to make the project work.
It's the creeping, or not so creeping, it's the rapid extension of the arm of the state, which is interfering in every aspect of our lives. Our economy doesn't run on tax and aspiration. It runs on public spending and on redistribution of wealth by the government. And this is just another step in that direction. They control our money through the way that they're governing, in the way that I've just described. They're going to control how we conduct our lives. I saw the other day Unilever package a photograph of a sandwich packet made by Unilever that was being sold. I have to test this. I hope I'm not telling porkies, but I was sent a photograph of this sandwich packet, and on it said 8.1% of your daily carbon footprint. So they're beginning to even tell us how much carbon is involved in eating a particular sandwich. And it was only one sandwich. It was nearly 10% of your carbon footprint. But
Keir Starmer can fly all the way from Britain to Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt to humiliate the country and embarrass himself in a total of about 2 minutes of photo op, because apparently his carbon dioxide doesn't count. Bill Gates flies around the world in his private jet telling us not to fly. Emma Thompson, the actress who I virtually boycott in programs and films now, flew all the way from America to join an Extinction Rebellion or some kind of demonstration against climate change. It beggars belief. When I
Yeah.
was working on the BBC, I had this person on my show, nice girl, nice woman, worried about climate. I said, do you ever fly? She says, yes, we're all going to Costa Rica for the summer. I said, how are you going to get there? Walk? It's just ridiculous. And there was another. There are so many examples. Another example, of course, is Greta Thunberg, who has now lost interest in the environment. Now she's going to save the Middle East. I have to say, I'm just stunned by this. I want to go through one more area, and then I want to talk about the dynamics. And that's the obvious one, which is, we mentioned it before, migration. I'm sure you know what this is, the English Channel. That's 20 miles. And we can't defend it. Reform's quite clear. They say that anyone who sets foot in this country will be sent back and never get the chance to claim asylum. What would Advance UK do?
Well, reform's not quite clear. That's not what they said. A year ago, Farage said that it was impossible to detain and deport all illegal migrants, and that he had no ambition to do it. Then a few weeks ago, he came out and he said that all illegal migrants would be detained and deported. And he said that would include women and children. Then the next day, when he was challenged, he said, no, it doesn't include women and children. And he holed his own policy under the waterline. He in a moment where he thought he better say it excludes women and children because he's trying to curry favor with the reporter who was interrogating him. He basically held his policy below the waterline. Then he went on to say, Lembit, in the same interview, that actually the European Convention on Human Rights will be removed from the United Kingdom, but not from Northern Ireland because of the Good Friday Agreement. And so he held his own deportation plan again, because if you're an illegal migrant in the UK wishing to avoid being deported because you fear that the ECHR has been removed now from the body of law and you won't have its protection, you would go straight to Northern Ireland. He gave them a straight green card to go and shelter from his own policy. So reform is like an adolescent. It wishes to be muscular and it wishes to be seen to be doing the right thing. But like an adolescent who thinks he knows everything, they get it wrong time and time again. Their deportation policy doesn't work. Then they talking about transgender and stuff. I don't know if you remember this. They were doing a press conference. They'd recruited some retired prison chief, a lady called Frake, and they asked Frake. So in the one breath,
Oh yes,
Farage,
that's great. Yeah.
and on the one hand, reform denounces DEI, and DEI is the body of regulations through which transgenderism is given its ability to function. DEI, on the one hand, reform says it's going to abandon it. Then in that same press conference with Frake, they said, well, we would accept transgender women, in other words, men, going into women's prisons. And then Anne Widdecombe came out and she tried to correct it. She said on Talk TV or GB News or both that actually what reform meant that it had their bits and pieces cut off. They would be allowed to go into women's prisons. And then Sarah Potchin came out and contradicted that. And they were all over the place. So they're like an adolescent. They haven't thought it through. They don't have a political philosophy. They don't have proper grown-up mechanisms in place to determine policy and then articulate them. And so reform, I don't think, is going to make it to 2029. And it's absolutely vital, therefore, that Advance exists.
Now, I'll finish on your party, but you and Nigel Farage were obviously very close at times. There you are at some event, and you were seen together a lot. There must have been a time when you had more faith in reform. And the obvious question is, that being so, why wouldn't you want to reform rather than going to the extra trouble of setting up your own party?
Oh, no, I did. I tried very hard to reform. I fought a 6-month battle to get it to democratize, to bring in other people, to have checks and balances in place, processes and so on that could be adhered to. Quite a public battle. If you go back and do a search between July 2024 and December 2024, you'll see I was very, very vocal about their lack of democratization, which is the heart of the problem. Because if you have some form of democracy in the party and therefore the ability to take other voices into the party, and produce good thinking and produce good results, then the problem of Farage being reform and reform being Farage would go. But Farage and I haven't really seen eye to eye since August 2020. It's been a long, long time. And I only joined Reform because Richard Tice was leader, and I thought Farage had given up on politics. When he came back, I knew that my days in Reform were numbered.
Okay, but there's no doubt that Reform is doing pretty well in the polls. Depending when you're watching this, ladies and gentlemen, we're filming this before the Caerphilly by-election. I've been there. I'm sure that Reform will be first or second. If I had to push to a guess, I'll put myself on the line here. I think Reform might just win it, but it'll be close. It'll be 5, I would say 5-7% either way. And they have this huge groundswell. And what I've learned is you can't always get what you want, to quote a song. And I would say Reform's a whole lot better than what we've got.
Well, you don't know that. And I would say that actually Reform, as this adolescent, muscular adolescent that's got more confidence than it has sense, is actually embedding within itself a whole load of people who should not see the light of day of politics. For example, they're taking on all the failed and ejected Tory MPs. You know, Jake Berry, who was, he voted Remain, he pro-lockdown, pro-net zero, has joined Reform. They've taken on, 2 days before they took on Nadine Dorries, Farage was on Capitol Hill denouncing the Online Safety Act. And then 2 days later, they took on Nadine Dorries. Nadine Dorries was the architect of the Online Safety Act. He produced it. And so I don't think they're going to last till 2029. I think it's just a mirage.
In which case, and it's never long enough to talk with you. It's always fascinating. But let's finish on your subject. Prime Minister Ben Habib gets elected. Ben Habib is now living in Downing Street, hopefully not putting the Ukrainian flag on the front of it. What would be the first things that an advanced UK government would do? The first 100 days?
The manifesto that we produce, the aim of the manifesto we produce is not just to have a set of policies in it. We're going to addend to the manifesto the draft legislation which we intend to pass immediately as we enter Parliament. And the reason we're doing that is so that it's abundantly clear to the British people precisely what it is we're wishing to do. And so that we have a democratic mandate for it. It prohibits the Lords from interfering with the legislation. And the principal aim, not in our first 100 days, but in our first 2 or 3 days of government, will be to repeal all the damaging legislation, which is just about everything that's happened in the last 30 years. We want to restore the United Kingdom back to the pre-Tony Blair years, where we actually understood what it meant to be a British citizen. We understood what freedom of speech was. We understood what equality under the law was, because we had all of that. We took it all for granted. Things like the Human Rights Act, the Equalities Act, the Climate Change Act, and all their progeny, the Terrorism Act 2000, all of this has shut down our ability to think straight. That all has to go. And that'll happen in the first 2 or 3 days of an advanced government. It's going to be a legislative revolution in the first 2 or 3 days of advanced taking office.
How many members do you have?
We've got 37,000 members.
Not bad at all.
Which puts us just behind the SNP's at the next largest party with 54,000 members. We're now the 7th largest party by members in the country. I've
got to salute your industry. You said you'd do it. You have. You waited till you had 30,000 before your launch, as I recall.
Yeah, that's right. And we've done it, and we're growing. And you know, we've been shut down by media. I'm very grateful to you and others who have me on podcasts. But GB News has shut us down because they want to protect Farage. Talk has shut us down because they want to protect Farage. But we've now got 37,000 members. So we don't need the media in the way that I thought we did at the beginning. We're just going to go straight to our members. Reform had 30,000 members in May 2024, just before that general election. We can fight a general election already, Lembit. We are ready to fight a general election.
Well, this station, we're not a podcast, we're a TV station. We're
station, sorry.
Fully online. Yeah. How dare you? I suppose I could call you a social club then.
Sorry, forgive me.
That is all right. We're the home of free speech, and it would be unthinkable to refuse the opportunity to speak to a great mind like you. You don't have to be for or against Advance UK to be interested in what you have to say. And I have to say, I'm very grateful that you've given us your time. If you were to summarize your ambition for the next 5 years in a sentence, what would that be?
2 ambitions. 1, to win the narrative to make the British people aware that Advance UK exists, and that the policies and political philosophy we have is diametrically opposed to the way that we've been governed for the last 30 years, and that we will save the country and make it a proud, independent, prosperous country. That's the first objective. And then the second one is to do well in the polls and to be in a position to form the next government.
If we put a semicolon where there should be a full stop, you get away with that being technically a sentence. Thanks very much indeed. That is Ben Habib, the leader of Advance UK. Hope you found that interesting. You can find out more, of course, by going to their site. Interesting stuff, and clearly a credible force there. Lots of questions to ask about potential strains between Reform UK and Advance UK, and maybe one would be the government, the other the opposition. I'll leave you to decide. Don't forget, lots of other shows, and if you like what you're seeing here, even if you don't like it but you respect it, then why not subscribe? Go to Unprecedented TV on YouTube and join us. Ever-growing number there. My name is Lembit Öpik. That was Lembit Öpik Live here on Unprecedented TV. Have a great day.
Immediate ceasefire in Gaza, the return of the sausages.